When I saw the bank notification on my phone, my hands froze. It wasn't just any expense, it was a large sum at a luxury resort. He'd said he'd be on a business trip, busy in meetings. But that name on the screen left me with no doubt. The shock was accompanied by a strange calm, as if my body knew something big was about to happen. For a moment, I tried to believe it could just be a billing error. I took a deep breath, ran my hand over my face, and closed my eyes. But then I remembered that days before, my cousin had posted photos of a very similar place. My heart raced as if it wanted to burst from my chest. It felt like the whole world had stopped spinning, leaving only that notification pulsing before me. I sat up in bed, my phone still vibrating in my hand. There was the breaking point between what I believed and what life wanted to show me. It was as if all the conversations, the promises, and the smiles had shattered in a second. But I still didn't know how much pain and revelations lay ahead. That weekend, he left the house with his usual small suitcase. He said he had meetings in another city, and that he wouldn't know the exact time to return. I gave him a quick kiss, unsuspecting, just wishing him a safe trip. The routine of so many years had blinded me to the details. I never imagined that this would be the beginning of a silent breakdown. I remember when I still believed every word he said. We had a stable life, simple dinners, laughter in front of the TV. There were travel plans, shared dreams, and even small arguments that were quickly resolved. He made me feel secure, as if he were the pillar of our family. Maybe that's why I never questioned it so much. But the notification on my phone opened a crack that was impossible to ignore. The resort's price wasn't small, and the date matched exactly the day he said he was in a meeting. I stared at that number like someone staring at a puzzle. Something that didn't quite fit with the man I shared my bed with. It was at that point that unease settled inside me. That night, alone at home, I searched my memory for signs. There were times when he took longer to respond to messages. Other times he said he was exhausted, but he'd appear smelling fragrant, as if he'd just come from a date. I remembered a shirt stored in the laundry basket with a scent that wasn't mine. Small fragments that until then I'd pushed into oblivion. It's strange how we get used to justifying other people's flaws. I'd thought myself, he's just tired, it's just work, he needs space. Excuses seemed easier than facing the truth, and, somehow, I was afraid to see what was right in front of me. As if knowing was worse than suspecting. On Sunday, I went to my mother's house. Light conversation, family lunch, everything seemed normal. But my mind was far away, stuck on that notification. When everyone laughed in the living room, I watched my phone on the table, waiting for any sign of confirmation. It was as if my life had been divided between before and after that message from the bank. In the bathroom, alone, I opened the bank app again. The name of the resort was there, clear as a cruel reminder. I clutched my phone to my chest, trying to hold back the anguish. My breath was short, my eyes watering. But I couldn't share this with anyone yet. It was too early to accuse without proof. On the way home, I saw my cousin's new post. An unassuming photo of her wearing sunglasses in a turquoise pool. So far, nothing special. But when I looked at the reflection in the glass behind her, I noticed a male silhouette. I couldn't be completely sure, but my heart raced. That detail haunted me for the rest of the night. Lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection. The sound of the bank notification seemed to echo in my head, as if stuck in a loop. I wondered, could it be a coincidence? Or was it that, for the first time, I was facing stark reality? Fear and anger fought for space within me. The next day, he returned from his so-called work trip. He came home smiling, hugged me, and told me how exhausting the meetings had been. I looked into his eyes, searching for cracks in the lie. But he spoke so naturally, as if he believed his own deception. I remained silent, only nodding. It was a strange sensation, as if we were in two parallel worlds. He, living his version of events. I, with my mind tormented by proof I didn't want to have. At the same time, I felt a pang of shame. How could I not have noticed before? Had other people already suspected? Doubt was an invisible prison. During dinner, I noticed another detail. While he was talking to me, he turned his phone face down on the table. A small gesture, almost imperceptible, but now I saw it differently. Before I would have ignored it. But in that moment it seemed to scream at me. The lie hid in the smallest movements. I got up from the table and went to the kitchen, pretending to get water. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. I couldn't prove anything yet. I needed to observe more. If I spoke without proof, he'd turn the tables. I knew this because it had happened before, in much smaller situations. The fear of being gaslighted was real. I returned to the living room and he was laughing at a video on his phone. He pretended it was something from work, but I could tell he didn't want to show it to me. With every gesture, every word, trust shattered. It was like watching a castle crumble stone by stone. The person I loved was beginning to transform into a stranger before me. That night, the silence in the house seemed deafening. I listened to the shower as he showered and thought, how many times had that body been elsewhere? How many stories had he made up to keep me calm? I wanted to scream, but no sound came out, only a heavy pain pinning me to the mattress. At work the next day I couldn't concentrate. Every client I saw seemed distant, every paper on the desk lost its importance. The only thing occupying my mind was that charade. I opened my phone from time to time, almost waiting for another notification to confirm my suspicions. Living like this was suffocating. A colleague asked if I was okay, saying I looked tired. I smiled slightly, hiding my turmoil. I didn't want to open my life to anyone yet. I needed to get my shit together before exposing anything. But it was hard to hide it when my heart was at war. I felt like I could collapse at any moment. Arriving home, I found him watching TV. Naturally, as if nothing was happening. The room smelled faintly sweet, not my own. It bothered me so much that I almost asked him right away, but I swallowed hard and sat next to him. The proximity felt like a cruel farce. As he talked about his day, I just watched the details of his face, his gestures, the way he laughed. I wondered if he'd ever laughed like that with her. If he'd ever used the same sweet words, the same nicknames. It was like living with a ghost, someone who no longer fully belonged to me. Over the next few days I mentally noted every behavior. Unexplained delays, silenced messages, strange smells. The sum of small things became an unbearable weight. I no longer needed to make excuses for him. The truth was there, pulsing before me, and the more I observed, the more certain I became. I began to feel a mixture of pain and coldness. The pain of being deceived, the coldness of understanding that I needed to prepare myself. I didn't want to be caught off guard nor act impulsively. I needed clarity, proof, strategy. It was like planning a silent war. Me, alone, against the lie. One day, rummaging through laundry, I found another clue. In a pants pocket, an Uber receipt to a strange address. It wasn't an office, nor a familiar restaurant. I guarded that paper like one guards a weapon. It was another piece fitting into the puzzle he was trying to hide. That night, he arrived late and said the traffic was terrible. I smiled calmly without question, but deep inside, the confirmation was almost absolute. A receipt burned in my pocket like undeniable proof. I felt myself getting closer to discovering everything. The lie wouldn't hold up for long. While he slept beside me, I lay awake. The sound of his breathing was a painful reminder. So many nights together, so many years shared, and now every second felt like a robbery. I wanted to get up and leave, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was trapped between the past and the truth that crushed me. I began to notice the details of his body more closely. Scratches on his neck, subtle marks he claimed were from his razor, different perfumes exchanged between outfits. The excessive care with his cell phone, even taking it to the bathroom. Every gesture became suspicious. And I asked myself, how had I not noticed before? My head was spinning, but my heart already knew. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't fabrication. I just needed to put all the pieces together so that no doubt remained. And when that time came, nothing could erase the impact of the revelation. He would have to face his own reflection in the lie. But I still had no idea what I was about to find, and how that discovery would change everything forever. The memory of the Uber receipt wouldn't leave my mind. I put the paper in a drawer along with other small pieces of evidence I'd been collecting. Each piece of evidence seemed to scream on its own, but together they formed a cruel portrait of the truth. I was no longer faced with assumptions. It was a fine line between certainty and the courage to face the inevitable. I began to pay more attention to the times he disappeared. Sometimes he'd say he was going to the gym, but he'd return with his clothes almost dry, no sign of sweat. Other times he'd claim meetings, but he hadn't brought a laptop or documents. I mentally noted every contradiction. It was like watching a poorly rehearsed play, with repeated lines and scene errors. One day he'd forgotten his smartwatch on the sink. Surreptitiously, I picked it up to put it on the nightstand. That's when I saw notifications that had been erased, but still left traces. My heart raced. There were no names, just initials, but the content suggested intimacy. It was as if the truth was begging to be seen. I took a deep breath and replaced the watch before he noticed. I returned to the living room, trying to act normal. He laughed at something on TV, unaware that I had already peeked into part of his secret. It felt like I was living with a stranger. And the most disturbing thing was how naturally he behaved around me. At the grocery store, another detail caught my attention. He put a brand of wine in the cart I had never seen before. When I asked, he said it was a suggestion from a coworker. But that night, when he opened the bottle, I realized I knew that flavor well. It was my cousin's favorite wine. The lump in my throat was immediate. I tried to remain steadfast, but the coincidences multiplied. Every detail seemed connected to her. A song he suddenly started listening to was the same one she posted on her stories. A new expression he used, one I'd heard her use at family gatherings. The puzzle came together effortlessly. One night, while he slept, I risked opening his laptop. The password was the same as always, but almost everything was too clean. History erased, folders empty. However, in a forgotten corner, I found a restaurant reservation receipt. The detail was cruel. The table for two was on the same day he told me he'd stayed late at the office. I felt a mixture of pain and coldness. He wasn't careless, but neither was he perfect at covering his tracks. The flaws were there, enough to make me see. I no longer needed much to confirm it. The truth was out in the open. But part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation. At work, I found myself lost in thought. While everyone talked about goals and projects, I felt out of place. As if I were living a parallel life, where every detail of my routine was tainted by a lie. It was suffocating to carry it alone, but I still didn't have the courage to expose it. I began to avoid physical contact. Hugs, kisses, even the simple touch of hands. Everything felt forced, lifeless. He noticed my distance and asked if I was tired, responded with a vague smile without elaborating. Silence was my form of resistance. I didn't want to feign affection where only distrust remained. At home, mealtimes grew increasingly silent. The sound of cutlery hitting the plate seemed louder than any conversation. He talked about work, but I barely listened. I was too busy trying to understand when our story began to unravel. It was as if I were watching from the outside. One Saturday, I decided to organize my closet. Among the clothes, I found a woman's scarf. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen one before. The scent was sweet, different from my perfume. I held that piece of fabric as if it were evidence in court. It was impossible to deny it any longer. The lie was already inside my house. I put the scarf back as if I hadn't seen anything. I didn't want to arouse suspicion. I needed calm, strategy. I couldn't risk missing the chance to expose everything definitively. It was like walking on thin ice. Any misstep could make me fall prematurely. The cruelest part was keeping up appearances. At family gatherings, he acted like the perfect husband. He played with his nephews, helped carry dishes, and told funny stories. And I, beside him, smiled on the outside and bled on the inside. It was a theater I hadn't chosen to participate in, but was forced to play. My mother, at one of these gatherings, commented that I seemed distant. I replied that it was just work fatigue. I didn't have the courage to tell her. How could I explain that the man everyone admired was the same one who was betraying me right under my eyes? The weight of this secret was almost unbearable. I returned home that night feeling like I was carrying an invisible burden. He fell asleep quickly, as he always did. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how life can change in seconds. A receipt, a reflection in a photo, a forgotten handkerchief. Small things that together could destroy years of trust. I decided to write it down in a notebook, hidden in the back of the closet. There, I recorded every detail I discovered. I didn't want to rely solely on memory. I needed something concrete, organized. It was my way of not going mad. Each page filled was like a silent outburst, but also like a plan in the making. The days passed and the distance between us grew. I no longer saw the same man, just a facade. He still laughed, still made plans, but everything seemed false. The emptiness grew inside me, and each night the silence grew heavier. It was like sleeping next to a stranger. One day, during a quick lunch, he received a text and covered it up. He grabbed his phone from under the table and smiled to himself. When I asked, he said it was his soccer group. But I noticed the sparkle in his eyes was different, almost youthful. It was a kind of happiness I no longer evoked in him. My breath hitched, but I managed to compose myself. I didn't want him to notice my state. With every gesture of his, my certainty solidified. There was no going back, there was no more innocence. I was faced with a choice: continue living in the theater, or seek the complete truth, unmasked. His confirmation would come from where I least expected it. One afternoon, rummaging through the kitchen trash, I found a receipt. It was from a jewelry store. The detail that destroyed me was the date, the same day he forgot to call me to say goodnight. At that moment there was no more room for doubt. I treasured the paper as if it were gold. My mind worked silently, imagining who this gift was for. My heart already knew the answer, but it was too painful to accept. The weight of betrayal was like a chain binding my steps. I knew I needed to decide how to act. My cousin, without imagining anything, continued posting photos on social media. Laughter, drinks, dinners in expensive places. I watched silently, almost feeling the venom seep through the images. Each post felt like an indirect message, as if trying to reveal something hidden. The discomfort was unbearable. I began to avoid seeing her. At family gatherings, I made excuses not to go. The mere thought of looking into her eyes made me nauseous. It was too cruel to imagine she knew everything and yet smiled at me. The silence between us was more revealing than any words. At home, I continued accumulating evidence. Receipts, screenshots, notes. I didn't want to act impulsively. I needed something irrefutable. I knew that when the time came, he wouldn't be able to deny it. The lie would be crushed by the weight of the evidence. I just needed patience. The nights became too long. The sound of his breathing beside me was like a cruel reminder. So many years together, and yet, a distance impossible to bridge. The love that had once existed seemed to have been erased, replaced by a sham. It was a silent pain, but one that strengthened me. I looked in the mirror and tried to recognize who I was. A mature woman who had dedicated years of her life to a relationship that was now crumbling. There were no wrinkles that hurt as much as the feeling of having been deceived. But there was also a strength emerging, hidden behind the pain. I realized I was no longer afraid of what was to come. The shock had turned into determination. I needed to face it, needed to know how far he would go. The lie had an expiration date, and I was willing to see it through to the final act. It was only a matter of time before the truth was finally revealed. And when that moment arrived, nothing would be the same again. That week, I began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed. He always came home with the same speech: traffic, meetings, unexpected events. But the clock told a different story, and his gaze, increasingly distant, revealed what his mouth insisted on hiding. I wrote everything down mentally, like someone preparing a silent dossier. One day, while preparing dinner, I heard his phone vibrate in the living room. The sound of a short notification, but enough to catch my attention. When I looked, the screen was face down, as always. The repetition of that gesture gnawed at me. It was as if the device itself was screaming secrets I couldn't hear. At breakfast, he hurriedly got up to answer a call in the backyard. His voice was low, almost whispered. But I noticed the different tone. It wasn't how he spoke to coworkers. The intimacy was there, hidden in the long pauses and suppressed laughter. My heart pounded, but I pretended not to notice. At times like these, the loneliness within a marriage weighs more heavily than any physical absence. Being by his side and, at the same time, feeling miles away. It's like sharing the same house with someone who no longer shares the same life. The bed, the table, the walls. Everything seemed complicit in a lie. On Sunday, we were invited to a barbecue at a friend's house. While we were chatting in a group, I noticed he discreetly stepped away to answer a message. When I looked back, I saw the reflection of the screen in the window. It was a photo, but I couldn't make it out. Just the way he smiled was enough to hurt me. The most painful thing was the contrast between his public and private life. Among friends, he seemed the exemplary husband, attentive, charismatic, always willing to help. But when we were alone, silence prevailed. The difference was so glaring, I wondered how no one else noticed. That night, the argument started with something banal, a misplaced towel, a sly comment. But deep down, it wasn't about the towel or the routine. It was about the distance, the emptiness that separated us. He accused me of being overly sensitive, of creating problems where none existed. And once again I tried to swallow my words. His strategy was clear, to turn the tables. If I questioned, it was because I was exaggerating. If I observed, it was because I was unfoundedly suspicious. It was a cycle of manipulation that left me feeling grounded. The infamous gaslighting disguised as a couple's conversation, and I no longer knew whether to cry or harden. I began to change my stance. Instead of confronting, I simply observed. I treasured every detail as if it were a rare collector's item. The strange smell on his clothes, the rush to hide his cell phone, the delays that clashed with his commitments. Everything went into my mental drawer, where the tests piled up. One rainy night, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw light in the hallway. He was in the living room, sitting on the sofa, typing on his cell phone. I walked to the door, silently, and just watched. His face, illuminated by the screen, showed an expression I hadn't seen in years, not of concern, but of enchantment. It was like watching a teenager in love. I returned to the bedroom silently, without him noticing. I lay down, but sleep wouldn't return. The image of him smiling to himself was etched in my mind. It was too cruel to think that that glow wasn't for me. The emptiness in my chest transformed into a mixture of pain and determination. But at work, the days became a burden. Colleagues talked about vacations, plans, family, while I carried a secret that suffocated me. I responded with short sentences, trying to appear normal, but inside, every word was swallowed with effort. The mask of normalcy was increasingly difficult to maintain. I decided to do something I'd never thought I'd do: check my detailed credit card statement. Among the mundane purchases were expensive dinners, restaurant reservations, and even deliveries to addresses I didn't recognize. My stomach churned. These weren't just quick getaways. There was planning, care, investment. It was a parallel relationship. I spent hours staring at those cold lines on the screen, numbers and names of establishments that told a story of betrayal. A silent narrative, recorded in every transaction. What to the bank was just a record, to me was a scream. A raw account of how my marriage was being used as a facade. At dinner that night, he talked about work, laughing as if nothing were wrong. I watched him calmly, almost as if I were seeing from the outside. The contrast between his naturalness and the truth I carried was unbearable. Each bite felt forced, and inside me, the certainty solidified. My cousin posted another photo at the same resort. This time the detail was more cruel. In the background, a towel draped over the chair with embroidered initials. His. Enlarging that image was like being punched in the gut. There was no more room for excuses. The truth was before my eyes. I kept the photo, silently, as part of the evidence. It was no longer a question of suspicion, it was a realization. The bond between the two was clear, visible, cruel. I needed strength to decide what to do with it. The weight of betrayal was overwhelming, but also liberating. I began to look at myself in the mirror with different eyes. Who was that woman who accepted living with lies? The maturity I had built throughout my life could not be buried by the fear of facing it. I knew I deserved more. But acknowledging this was also painful. It was admitting that love was not enough. In the kitchen, while washing the dishes, I realized I was crying without realizing it. The tears mingled with the water, as if invisible. It was a silent cry, without scandal, without an audience. Just me and the reality that was imposing itself. The pain had become part of the routine, as common as breakfast. In the days that followed, I adopted a different approach. I stopped trying to please, stopped seeking attention. I began to live as if it were just me. He noticed the coldness and asked if I was distant. I replied that I was just tired. Lying was now my weapon, and I used it as naturally as he did. Every night before bed, I thought about what the moment of truth would be like. I didn't want explosions or screams. I wanted something deeper, more precise. something he could never deny or erase. The idea of a planned confrontation grew within me, like a silent flame. One afternoon he arrived home with flowers, a gesture that, in other times, would have delighted me. But in that moment, it seemed like just an attempt at disguise. I received the gift with a restrained smile, but deep down, I knew what it meant. Guilt. Those flowers were more of a denunciation than affection. As I tidied the living room, I thought about how so many women go through similar situations. The difference is that many never find out, others prefer to close their eyes, but I didn't want to be another statistic. I wanted to look back and know that I had faced the truth. In this mix of pain and lucidity, I felt I was no longer the same woman. Trust had shattered, but amid the shards, a strength was also emerging. I was no longer just a victim. I was becoming a spectator and a strategist, and that changed everything. The lies, the receipts, the photos. Nothing could be ignored anymore. Life was pushing me toward an inevitable choice. I could pretend until the end or face it head-on. Silence was no longer enough. The flame of truth grew and consumed every part of me. It was at that point that I understood. The greatest betrayal wasn't his with someone else. It was his with me, with our history, with everything we'd built. And that was unforgivable. And what I was about to do would leave no room for return. That morning I woke before him. I stood still, simply watching. He slept peacefully, as if carrying no weight. I looked at the face I'd shared for so many years and wondered, at what point did I stop knowing the person beside me? The feeling was strange, as if sharing a bed with a stranger. I got up slowly and went to the kitchen to make coffee. I set the table as usual, bread, fresh coffee, fruit. But nothing felt the same. The routine, which once had the flavor of home, now felt like a performance. As I cut an apple, I felt a lump in my throat. Life was the same, but inside I was no longer the same. When he entered the kitchen, he smiled as if everything was in perfect order. He kissed me on the cheek and began talking about his workday. I simply listened, without responding much. I observed every gesture, every word, like someone studying the enemy. His calm was proof he believed in his own disguise. He picked up his cell phone and placed it on the table, face down, as always. A simple gesture, but one that already carried a world of meaning. I took a deep breath so as not to show how much it was eating away at me. It was as if every detail was another hammer blow to the already crumbling wall of trust. I decided not to react. Silence became my shield. He spoke, I simply nodded. Inside I gathered strength, putting the pieces together. It was as if I were assembling a chessboard, and my every move was considered. It wasn't time to attack, but to wait for the right moment. At work, the feeling of living two lives persisted. I answered emails, served clients, attended meetings. But everything was automatic, as if I were a robot. My mind was always elsewhere, returning to exam papers, receipts, photos. It was impossible to focus on anything else. A colleague invited me out to lunch. I accepted, trying to distract myself. At the restaurant, she talked about her husband's problems, trivial, everyday things. And I just thought about how every couple carries secrets that are often hidden behind smiles and good looks. On the way home, I saw his car parked on the street before the time I'd said. I waited a few minutes before going in, trying to understand. When I got inside, he was already in the shower. His coat was thrown on the sofa, and in his pocket I found another receipt, another expensive dinner at a romantic restaurant. I kept the paper hidden like a weapon. With each new piece of evidence, my heart tightened, but also gained strength. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was determination. His silence became an accomplice to my preparation. I knew I couldn't keep up this charade much longer. At dinner, he tried to make conversation, but my patience was thin. I responded with short, curt sentences. He noticed, but didn't press the point. It was as if he were relieved I wasn't questioning anything. And that, in a way, made me even more certain that he was overly confident in his own lie. That night, lying next to him, I noticed another detail. A discreet scratch on his arm, one he hadn't had before. I asked him what it was, and he quickly replied, saying he'd bumped into a shelf at work. The explanation came too quickly, without pausing to think. I knew it wasn't true. Quick lies are the easiest to spot. His gaze avoided mine, his hand shook slightly. Maybe he believed I wouldn't notice. But I understood. Every detail, every glance, every misplaced word. I didn't need much more to know. A day later, I decided to test his reaction. I commented, casually, about my cousin. I asked if he had seen the photos she posted online. He froze for a second before responding. He smiled and said he didn't follow, but the pause, that pause, said it all. It was the silence of someone trying to hide something that was already overflowing. I kept the reaction as further proof. It was impossible to deny. There was something there, something dirty, something wrong. The connection between the two was clearer every day. I just needed to be cool enough to withstand the wait. At the office, when I opened my email, I noticed an alert message from the bank. Another purchase, this time at a flower shop. Expensive flowers, delivered to an address that wasn't ours. The heart raced, but the body remained firm. I knew he wouldn't buy me flowers like that. Not anymore. That night, he came home empty-handed. He talked about the traffic, complained about his boss, and threw himself on the couch. Flowers weren't for me. And his naturalness, as if nothing had happened, was what hurt me the most. The double life was clearer than ever. Little by little, the pain began to give way to something else. A controlled, almost strategic type of anger. I didn't want disorderly revenge. I didn't want to scream or break dishes. I wanted something bigger. Something that hit him where it hurt most. The mask he wore in front of everyone. While washing the dishes, I looked out the window and thought about how many women lived the same thing as me. How many were silent, how many pretended not to see. How many agreed to share their lives with a traitor just for fear of being alone. I didn't want to be one of those. I wouldn't accept dying inside. I started planning. The hidden notebook already had pages full of details. The tests were organized, dated, numbered. I felt like an investigator inside my own home. It was cruel, but also liberating, because with each note I gained more clarity. On Sunday we went to my mother's house, the family together, laughter, music on the radio. And there was my cousin, smiling, hugging everyone. When she looked at me, I felt a shiver. It was as if there was a hidden message in that look. A mix of provocation and challenge. My stomach dropped. During lunch, I noticed him discreetly observing her. Small glances, quick, but enough to hurt me. I ate slowly, trying to hide the tightness in my chest. It was too cruel to witness that under the same roof. The family theater hid a script of betrayal before me. After lunch, he offered to help in the kitchen. I stayed in the room but watched from afar. He and she close, exchanging low words. Maybe no one noticed, but I did. And every detail, every gesture was another knife stuck in my confidence. I returned home in silence, carrying the feeling of suffocation. He turned on the radio in the car, humming a song as if nothing had happened. I just looked out the window, feeling a deep emptiness. It was as if his entire life had turned into one big mistake. At night, I sat on the porch alone. The cold wind hit the face, but the mind burned. I knew I couldn't continue living like that. Silence was no longer protection, it was prison. I needed to take a step. I needed to choose between remaining silent forever or exposing the truth. I ran my hand through the hidden notebook and reread all the notes. Every receipt, every detail, every contradiction. It was impossible to deny it. I had everything in hand. The decision now was not about whether to believe or not. It was about how, when, and where to expose that in the most accurate way. I lay down, but I couldn't sleep. His body next to me felt like it weighed tons. The sound of his breathing sounded like irony. So many years together, so many nights shared. And now, everything has been reduced to grotesque theater. I knew I was about to break the curtain. The dilemma was cruel. Act quickly and miss the chance for a greater impact, or wait for the perfect moment. I wanted his fall to be complete. I wanted the mask to fall off in front of everyone. I wanted the world to see what I already saw. And as I planned in silence, destiny began to align the pieces in a way I could never have imagined. That week, he said he would travel again for work. The tone was natural, almost rehearsed, like someone repeating a line so many times that they no longer need to think. I tried to believe it, but inside I was just writing down one more lie. The difference is that, this time I wouldn't let it go unnoticed. As he packed his suitcase, I watched carefully. Shirts lined up, new perfume, care with details that I didn't have when I went out with me. Each gesture was a silent confession. I remained calm, helping to fold an item of clothing as if nothing was wrong. But his chest burned with contained anger. The night before leaving, he slept quickly. I, on the other hand, lay awake thinking about how I could confirm everything. I decided to install the same card monitoring application he used on my cell phone. This way, any expenses would fall in real time for me. It would be definitive proof, with no room for excuses. When he left the next morning, he gave me a quick kiss and said he would be back in 2 days. The car disappeared around the corner and I was left alone on the porch. The silence in the house seemed to scream. The heavy breathing that I carried inside my chest turned into a certainty. The moment of truth was close. The day dragged by until the first notification arrived. A meal at an expensive restaurant far from the city where he was supposed to be. The heart accelerated. I took a pen and paper and wrote down the time, place, and price. I no longer cried, I just collected evidence. Pain turned into discipline. In the evening, another notification. Drinks at a sophisticated bar. Another expense incompatible with the meeting agenda. I took a deep breath, feeling that I was getting closer and closer to confirmation. I looked at the notebook and wrote in bold letters, "He is not alone." It was almost a definitive sentence. The next day, I woke up early and went to work. I pretended to be normal, but inside my body burned with anxiety. At any time, another notification could appear, and it didn't take long. Around lunchtime, a big expense fell at a resort. The same name as the notification that marked me weeks before. I held the cell phone so tightly that my hands sweated. The stomach turned. There was no denying it anymore, he was there again. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control the nausea. Every bit of my distrust was now transformed into absolute certainty. I came home early that day, making up an excuse at work. I sat in the room in silence, staring at the walls. Everything seemed complicit in the lie. The sofa where we watched series, the table where we had dinner, even the bed that was still unmade. It was cruel to realize that every corner of the house carried a piece of the farce. At night, my cousin posted another photo, she in a bikini with a glass in her hand. Behind her, a table with 2 dishes. And in an almost imperceptible reflection, his profile. Enlarging that image was like being punched in the stomach. There was the confirmation I needed. I stared at the screen for long minutes. Breath held, body paralyzed. There was no more excuse, there was no more doubt. It was him in the same place, at the same moment, with the same person who should just be family. The ground felt like it had opened up beneath me. I closed my cell phone tightly and walked around the house. The legs were shaking, but the heart was firm. I no longer had room to cry. The shock had turned into something stronger. It was as if I had suddenly woken up from a deep sleep. And now, everything was clear. I decided not to text, not to call, not to confront. I wanted to wait for the return. I wanted to see how he would come back, what story he would come up with. It was time to observe the theater until the last act. The more he talked, the more evidence I would have against him. I spent the night awake, walking around the house, reviewing all my notes. The receipts, the prints, the details. Each piece fit together cruelly. I didn't need anything else to believe. But I wanted him to confirm it himself, with his own mouth, with his own gestures. The next morning, he sent a short message. "Good morning, love. Early meeting today." I read those words and almost laughed. The coldness of the text contrasted with the photo I had seen hours before. The lie was so blatant that it bordered on absurdity. And yet he wrote as if I were blind. The day dragged on until finally he returned. He entered the house smiling, hugging, talking about how tiring it had been. His smell was different, sweet, like the perfume I had smelled before. I watched in silence, mentally noting every detail. He would talk, and I would just let him sink into his own version. In the suitcase, I found a detail that almost went unnoticed. A feminine bracelet, hidden at the bottom of a shirt. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. My heart pounded, but I remained calm. I closed the suitcase again, as if nothing had happened. The proof was there, kept with me. During dinner, I asked how the trip had been. He talked about meetings, about demanding clients, about tiredness. The theater continued, each line rehearsed like a memorized script. I just listened, without interrupting. The lie flowed before me, and I no longer needed to ask anything. That night, lying next to him, I realized that something inside me had changed. The pain was still there, but it had turned into coldness. It was as if I had lost the ability to deceive myself. Love, which had once been the center of my life, now seemed like just a distant echo. In the following days, the routine returned to normal. He left early, came back late, pretended to be tired, but I no longer looked at him the same way. His every smile was a mask, every word a fake. I no longer saw my husband, but rather an actor in a role he had created. I decided to schedule a conversation with my cousin. I sent a simple message. "Can we meet?" She responded quickly, suggesting coffee. My heart raced, but I accepted it. I needed to see in her eyes what the photos and reflections had already shown. It was time to face another part of the truth. At the cafe, she arrived smiling as if nothing was wrong. He ordered a cappuccino and started talking about banalities. I observed her calmly, analyzing every gesture. Anger burned inside, but I kept my voice calm. I asked bluntly, "Do you have something to tell me?" Her smile faltered for a moment, but then recovered. I said no, that everything was fine, that I looked strange. But that hesitation, that split second, said more than any words. I no longer needed her to admit it. The truth was stamped in the silence. I left the cafe with a feeling of heaviness in my chest, but also of clarity. I already had everything I needed. The evidence, the reactions, the details. Now it was just a matter of time. The game was about to change, and I wanted to be prepared for when that happened. I got home and found him on the couch watching TV. He smiled as if nothing had happened. But in that smile there was no longer affection, only farce. I stared at him for a few seconds in silence before sitting down. Inside me, something had already been decided. The nights became different. I no longer slept in fear or sadness. Now I slept with plans. I thought about how to expose everything, how to transform the lie into a public unmasking. The idea of revenge took shape every day. And I knew his downfall would be inevitable. As I watched him sleep, I thought about how many women have gone through the same thing, how many remain silent, how many decide to swallow the pain. But I didn't want to be one of those. I wanted him to feel every bit of the humiliation he made me bear. And it was at that point that I realized the time to act was coming. I woke up at dawn with a weight on my chest and couldn't go back to sleep. I lay there, looking at the ceiling, feeling his breathing next to me as if it were the sound of a lie pulsing inside the room. I got up slowly, took the notebook I hid in the closet, and started reviewing all the notes. Each receipt, each date, each detail formed a parallel story that could no longer be ignored. It was as if I was putting together a puzzle that revealed the most painful image of my life. The silence in the house gave me the feeling of living in a courtroom. I was the judge, the investigator, and the victim all at the same time. I looked through the evidence and realized that I had enough material to confront him, but it wasn't time yet. He needed something bigger, something that would catch him off guard. I didn't just want an intimate confrontation. I wanted to expose the hoax in the most accurate way possible. The right moment needed to be planned calmly. At work, I tried to maintain a routine, but it was impossible. My colleagues talked about simple everyday problems, while I carried a secret that seemed to weigh tons. With each notification on my cell phone, my entire body went on alert, waiting for more proof. And when it didn't come, I looked for signs myself, looking at social media, the traces left by carelessness. It was like living in a state of permanent vigil where there was no rest. He began to notice my coldness. He asked a few times if I was different, if there was something wrong with me. I responded evasively, saying only that I was tired. But deep down he must have felt that I wasn't the same anymore. What he didn't know was that this distance didn't come from chance, but from the awareness of everything he was hiding. I was silently plotting my own way out. At a random dinner, he seemed more affectionate than usual. He took my hand, praised my hair, asked about my day. But it wasn't affection, it was guilt. I recognized that gesture as an attempt to compensate for my own guilty conscience. And instead of softening me, it strengthened me even more. It was confirmation that he was trying to maintain a balance that no longer existed. The following week, I decided I needed to look beyond what he showed me. I started noticing his car when it arrived. The passenger seat sometimes felt moved, the air conditioning set to a temperature I never used. They were minute details, but for those who already knew the truth, they screamed like indisputable evidence. Every little trace of his carelessness was a gift to my investigation. One night, I went to the market alone. In the parking lot, I saw his car parked in front of a nearby pharmacy, when he was theoretically at work. I didn't go down, I just watched from afar. A few minutes later, I saw my cousin walking out the door with a bag in her hands. And there he was in the car, smiling as he welcomed her. That image burned like fire inside me. I drove home in silence, driving with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The vision of the two of them together never left my head. I tried to control my breathing, but the tears flowed without me being able to stop them. I didn't just cry for the betrayal, I cried for the double disloyalty, for coming from someone who should have been family. It was as if two knives had been stuck into my chest at the same time. When he returned that night, he came in smiling, bringing me chocolates as if it were a surprise. He put it on the table and said he had remembered me on the way. The same bag I saw in her hand. I took the gift, thanked him with an icy smile, and put it in the fridge. I didn't say anything. The silence was crueler than any accusation. I started to adopt the tactic of listening more than talking. Every time he made up an excuse, I just nodded, mentally registering it. The contrast between the lie he created and the reality I already knew was almost unbearable. But I resisted. Because he knew that when the time came, there would be no argument that could save him. Family gatherings became unbearable. My cousin avoided looking at me directly, but her body spoke for itself. Forced laughter, nervous gestures, quick glances towards him. I stood my ground, participating in conversations but feeling every muscle in my body locked up. It was like being in the middle of a stage where everyone was acting, but I was the only one who knew the real script. One afternoon, at the office, I received a new notification from the bank. Another purchase at a restaurant, another test printed in cold letters on the screen. It was always the same pattern. Moments when he said he was too busy, but the expenses showed a different story. I took a printout and saved it. With each record, I felt closer to the moment when there would be no way for him to escape. Arriving home, I noticed that he was particularly excited. He cooked dinner, opened wine, talked about trips he would like to take with me. While he was talking about the future, I only thought about the recent past that he was trying to hide. Every plan he drew up sounded like an affront, and I let him talk, just waiting for the weight of the lie to collapse. During the night, I woke up to the sound of messages arriving on his cell phone. He slept heavily, and the device vibrated several times. I took a deep breath, took it slowly, and saw only the name of a saved contact with initials. The content wasn't there, but the time and insistence spoke for themselves. I put it back and went back to bed. Anger kept me awake. The next morning he asked me if I had slept well. I answered yes without hesitation. But inside, I felt at war. A silent battle, fought between my patience and his lie. With each passing day, strength grew in me. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted an exposure that was definitive. Life began to gain another perspective. I started to take better care of myself. I dressed differently, I changed small habits. I wasn't doing it for him, I was doing it for me. It was as if he was building a new version of the woman he tried to destroy with his betrayal. And that gave me a strange feeling of power. At work, a colleague commented that I looked different, more serious, but at the same time more confident. I smiled lightly without explaining. It was true. Carrying such a heavy secret had made me change. I was no longer the same person who accepted any excuse. I was becoming the woman who planned the outcome of her own story. One rainy night, I sat alone on the porch, looking at the wet street. I thought about how many times I shared dreams with him in that very place. How many plans for the future, how many laughs thrown to the wind, and now everything seemed so far away. It was as if that life had belonged to someone else. The one I went to, but which no longer existed. When he got home that night, he brought another excuse for being late. I looked into his eyes and just smiled, without saying anything. It was at that moment that I realized something important. He no longer had power over me. The lies that once made me doubt myself now only served to strengthen the certainty that I was right. The next day brought me another unexpected revelation. My cousin posted a photo in a coffee shop, and there he was in the background, blurry but unmistakable. I enlarged the image, and my heart beat faster. One more proof, one more detail. Fate seemed to conspire for me to have everything in my hands. I closed the cell phone and laid my head on the chair. The weight of betrayal no longer destroyed me like it used to. Now it served as fuel. I knew I was getting closer and closer to putting an end to that charade. The waiting time was running out. That photo in the coffee shop stuck in my mind for days. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't chance. It was him. The face, even blurred in the background, was impossible to mistake. It was as if the universe had given me one more piece that I needed. I saved the image on my cell phone and took a deep breath, no longer having room to deny reality. That night, I sat down with my notebook and reviewed everything I had gathered so far. Receipts, photos, prints of bank notifications, notes with dates and times. I had built a real process, as if it were a criminal case. The difference is that the victim was myself, and the defendant was sleeping peacefully in the next room. The irony was painful. He started to look at me differently, as if he noticed something had changed in me. It wasn't just the coldness in his eyes, it was the calmness with which I listened to him without questioning anything. The silence was uncomfortable, because he didn't know how much I knew. This insecurity was visible in his eyes, even when he tried to hide it. One Saturday night, he suggested we go out for dinner. I accepted immediately, without hesitation. I wanted to see how he behaved in public. I wanted to observe every detail. During dinner, I noticed his cell phone vibrating several times in his pocket. He didn't answer, but he also couldn't hide his discomfort. I purposely didn't take my eyes off the device. As he talked about banalities, I noticed every small gesture. The hand that went to his pocket and came back, the eyes that looked away, the rapid breathing. That was enough to confirm to me that the double life was taking a toll. The mask was starting to crack. It was only a matter of time before it completely collapsed. In the restaurant bathroom, alone, I looked at myself in the mirror. I no longer saw the naive woman who trusted blindly. I saw a stronger version of myself, someone who was no longer afraid of the truth. And in that instant, I decided I wasn't just going to silently confront him. I would make him feel the exposure the same way he exposed me. On the way home, he tried to talk about future trips. He spoke enthusiastically as if nothing was happening, but every word sounded like an insult. How to plan a future with someone who had already destroyed the present? I smiled lightly, nodded, but inside I was already planning something else. I was on another wavelength. During the week, I noticed that he started to contradict himself more. Dates that didn't match, stories poorly told, details forgotten. It was the fatigue of lying taking its toll. He no longer had the same firmness in his words. I took advantage of every slip-up, recorded it mentally, and recorded it in my notebook. It was as if he had dug his own grave. At the office, on a break, I picked up my cell phone and saw an unexpected notification. Another expense in an expensive restaurant. At the same time, he said he was stuck in a meeting. I looked around, took a deep breath, and wrote it down. I no longer shook like I used to. The pain was giving way to an almost frightening calm. I was ready for anything. That night, when he got home, he brought flowers. The same ones I already knew I had bought before for someone else. He placed it on the table, smiling, trying to show care. I took the bouquet and thanked her, but the look I gave her was calculated. He didn't notice, but that gesture no longer fooled me. For me, flowers now smelled like lies. Over the next few days, I noticed that he started avoiding a lot of contact with my family. He made up excuses not to go on dates. He said he was tired, he was always running away. But I knew the real reason. My cousin's presence at the same time as mine was unsustainable. The tension was in the air, and I could feel it even from afar. At home, the silence was increasingly heavy. The dinner table felt like an invisible battlefield. He spoke little, I responded even less. But behind that apparent calm, there was a war. A silent war, fought with weapons that only I knew, the evidence that was growing in my drawer. I decided to arrange a meeting with a close friend. I needed to vent to someone I trusted. In a discreet cafe, I shared part of what I was discovering. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and indignation. He said I needed to be careful, that men like that were capable of turning the tide. I heard it, but I knew it was beyond doubt. I returned home that day more determined. I didn't just want to catch it. I wanted to expose it. I wanted everyone to know. His mask needed to fall definitively, in front of those he least expected. It was more than a question of personal justice. It was a cry for dignity. I deserved to see the castle of lies crumble. One night, going through the living room drawer, I found another forgotten receipt. Another jewelry store purchase, on a Wednesday afternoon. There was no birthday, there was no reason. It was impossible not to connect the dots. I held that paper for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. The heart sank, but the mind remained cold. It was just another brick in the construction of truth. During the weekend, he said he needed to leave to take care of something urgent. I watched him leave, closed the door, and immediately logged onto social media. It didn't take long to find it. A new photo of my cousin in an expensive restaurant. And there it was, in the reflection of the glass, his presence again. The feeling was one of shock and anger, but no surprise. I stood there looking at the screen, trying to understand where everything had turned into this. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the cruelty of keeping the lie under my nose. It was like he was sure I would never find out. But what he didn't know was that I was already a few steps ahead. When he came home, he hugged me as if nothing had happened. The smell of feminine perfume hit me immediately. It wasn't mine, it wasn't known, it was more proof. I rested my head on his shoulder, but only to hide the look of fury I carried. Inside, the volcano was about to erupt. With each passing day, the feeling that the outcome was approaching grew stronger. The game was set up, the pieces were on the board. He had no idea, but I had already decided. I didn't just want to break up. I wanted him to be forced to face everyone around him and admit it. The fall would be public and it would be devastating. That night, before going to sleep, I watched him next to me. He slept soundly, without imagining that everything was about to change. I took a deep breath, trying to brace myself for impact. I knew the time was coming. And once it arrived, there would be no going back. And what I was about to do would not only leave scars on him, but on everyone who would watch the truth come to light. I woke up with a heavy heart and made the decision that week would be decisive. I spent the day organizing the evidence, prints, receipts, enlarged photos, and notes with dates, all kept in a discreet envelope. I called 2 trusted friends and arranged a quick meeting to share what I had, asking for absolute discretion. At the same time, I scheduled a family lunch for Sunday, without saying the real reason. I wanted him to feel safe, so that the fall would be more devastating. As I did it all, I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for planning the exhibition. Relief for finally controlling the narrative of my own life. In the days that followed, I lived like someone walking on glass, attentive, silent, leaving no clues. I pretended to be normal with him. I shared small everyday gestures. But inside, I was calibrating the sequence of facts I would show. In conversations with my friends, I rehearsed the sentences, decided the order of the prints, and chose who I would ask to speak first if he tried to divert the focus. It was a meticulous process. Nothing too emotional, nothing too casual. Every word needed to cut with precision. I felt that maturity gave me an advantage, not because I was cold, but because I knew exactly what I was looking for: truth and consequence. On Sunday, the house was filled with voices, laughter, and household chores. The perfect scene for him to make his public happy family performance. I sat at the table with the envelope within reach, and watched his every movement as if I were taking notes with my eyes. When the opportunity arose, a trivial conversation about travel, I interrupted, with surgical calm, and asked everyone to see something on my cell phone. I took the first print, showed it in a firm voice, and felt the air change. The laughter turned to silence, the conversation stopped, and the space he occupied became small and exposed. He tried to react with automatic denial, but without force. The evidence had already spoken. My cousin turned pale, the family moved away, and some friends stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. Instead of shouting, I chose objective words: dates, places, values, all placed before everyone without theatricality. Seeing his mask slowly falling was terrifying and at the same time, liberating. The truth, raw and excellent, did its job better than any emotional accusation. When the house finally regained its noise and life, I felt a strange calm settle, in not healing, but clarity. I knew the consequences would come: questions, judgments, painful decisions. It was no longer about making him suffer for revenge, but about ensuring he faced what he did in front of those who mattered. I held the envelope with the evidence, took a deep breath, and realized that from now on, nothing would be the same as before, and that my next action would determine not only his fate, but my new beginning. I packed my things in a small suitcase and left without looking back, feeling that freedom hurt just the right amount. I left behind not just a man, but a structure that normalizes lies and protects appearance over the truth. How many women will still ignore the signs? And if it were you, what would you do? The reconstruction was not quick, but it was mine. There was humiliation, process, difficult choices, and also redemption. Our silence breeds impunity. We need to speak up, support, and demand real consequences beyond the momentary scandal. Would you tell anyone or keep it to yourself?